Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. My guests today are Kathleen Scheible and Sandi Kaplan. Kathleen is a Board Certified Classical Homeopath and has a private homeopathy practice in the Bernal Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. She has practiced homeopathy for over 13 years and helps people of all backgrounds to lessen or resolve chronic health issues and improve overall health and well-being with homeopathic medicine. Kathleen founded the Bay Area Homeopathy Association in 2007 with help from a core group of motivated homeopaths, including Sandi Kaplan. Kathleen is the current president of the California Homeopathic Medical Society, founded in 1877. Sandi Kaplan has been practicing homeopathy for the last 17 years and runs a private practice called Divine Monkey Homeopathy. She has worked in low-income and youth clinics, women's shelters, and makeshift clinics in Tanzania. Sandi taught at the Center for Homeopathic Education in New York, supervises homeopathy students, and has trained as a trauma-informed practitioner. She recently traded her surfboard in for raised beds and a beehive in Sacramento, where she now practices. Sandi remains dedicated to treating people of various cultures, ethnicities, economic backgrounds, gender expressions, and lifestyles, believing everyone deserves quality health care. Today on the show, they help us answer the question, what exactly is homeopathy and how can it help me? They explain how homeopathy is different from most other Western medicine practices and how it even works on an emotional and spiritual level. They also share how they've used homeopathy to support their local queer communities. We also hear about why homeopathy is currently under the scrutiny of the FDA and what you can do to help keep it alive here in the U.S. To learn more about Kathleen, visit bernalhomeopathy.com. That's BERNAL homeopathy.com. And to learn more about Sandi, visit divinemonkeyhomeopathy.com. Hi, Kathleen and Sandi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
So as I start off most of my interviews, I thought I would start out by asking each of you to share the story about how you first got interested in homeopathy.
Sure. This is Kathleen. I found out about homeopathy because of what it did for both of my two kids, my son and my stepson. And I was working as an engineer at the time and had a really sort of busy, hectic schedule. And my son had some medium-level health issues, which were becoming more frustrating for him. And we had done really nothing except conventional medicine. I didn't know about alternative medicine. But I found one of his issues was with his ears, eustachian tube fluid, glue ear. And then he had developed asthma and eczema. And I started looking for some other options because those issues just weren't clearing for him. We found an osteopath, which was the first thing that really helped with his ears. And then she referred us, because it didn't so much clear it up, she referred us then to a homeopath. And within a month of one remedy, pretty much one time for him, kids often do really well with homeopathy if they're in pretty good health otherwise, and they haven't had a lot of suppressive therapy. So all three things, his ears, asthma, and eczema, got much better in the first month, to the point that we didn't need to manage them with anything else at that point, any inhalers or steroid creams. He still had them a little bit, but it was so minor comparatively speaking. So that was amazing. And I didn't know that it worked that way, and I didn't know how it worked or really what it was. I was really just trusting this osteopath who had helped us and this professional homeopath who we worked with. And then, so my stepson, my wife's son, he had chronic sequela of viral meningitis and the spinal tap, perhaps, that diagnosed his meningitis. And he was out of school for 6 months with that, with debilitating nausea and migraine headaches every day. So he was being treated for that and also just tested and retested for everything under the sun because nobody understood what was wrong with him at UCSF. So that was super frustrating, and that was much more stressful for my wife and I at the time. So after my son got help with homeopathy, we said, let's try taking him to the homeopath. And again, within one dose of Nux vomica, which has an affinity for the vagus nerve and some of those migraine headaches and symptoms that he was having, he started to feel a lot better. And he literally was in school the following Monday and with no more headaches or nausea, and kind of with his old energy back, his own spirit back, which had kind of really gone down after being sick for 6 months and not knowing what was wrong with himself, and we didn't know. So it was so dramatic. It doesn't always work that quickly and that dramatically, but as I say, for kids, often it can work quicker, not always. But as a parent who had seen both kids, suffer with something, and people will often say, well, I'm sure we'll talk about the potential for, homeopathy, and placebo effect is one of its big associations, I would say. But, and again, both of those situations, my kids were having lots of other placebos as well, such as conventional medication and Tylenol and ibuprofen and all these other things. So it really was very impactful to me to see them both get so much better in such a short amount of time. And so I said, I have to learn more about what this is. And within a year, I was studying in a part-time program.
And I also imagine that with children, regarding the placebo effect, they are probably not thinking about it as much. They're like, oh, well, I'm going to take this thing and this is going to be the thing that's going to help me. They're probably just like, all right, I'm putting this in my mouth because mom told me to.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Sandi, what about your story?
Well, just to tag on to that, that is the beauty of treating infants and babies and animals, is that they don't know what the placebo effect is. Or, hesitant people who are dragged in here by their parents or their wives who are resistant, watching people like that move towards healing, it's hard to hold on to that. This is a placebo sort of philosophy. So my personal experience was, for me, I was 23 and I had just moved out here from New York, and I hurt myself very badly, and my back, I had a back injury, and was told that I basically had a permanent disability. I would never run for a bus again. I was pretty much down and out for a couple of years. And I grew up in a household that did not do a lot of conventional medicine. Chicken soup, aspirin, that was about it. And so going to doctors and different body workers was not really working for me. And so it wasn't a big leap for me to try to look outside that and think like, oh, hell no, this is not the rest of my life. And I saw a program on alternative medicine on PBS, and it was just a jumping off point. And I started seeing acupuncturists. I started seeing another doctor who I did not know was a homeopath. It took me years to understand that what she was doing was giving me homeopathic remedies. And I healed to the point where I went on to play soccer for 20 years. So, then when I was thinking about what do I want to be when I grow up, after years of being in and out of different parts of the medical industry professionally, I discovered homeopathy, because at that point I still did not know the doctor I was seeing was a homeopath. And everything about it resonated for me. That it works with the body, that it teaches the body and the mind and the spirit something, that the body knows how to heal itself and it just needs to be reminded, that it doesn't do any animal testing. Like, everything about this branch of healthcare really spoke to me. And I didn't really know much about it, and I applied to school. And I remember that moment of sitting in my first class and just completely falling in love with this and thinking, this is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm meant to do. So my story is really just a love story about homeopathy. Sitting there and understanding that what I would then go on to do for the rest of my professional life was talk to people about who they are and help them walk themselves back towards health. It's just the greatest thing I can think to do.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about this thing called homeopathy, but maybe some of our listeners don't know what it is. And I have had another homeopath on the show before, but they also practiced herbalism, and so we mostly focus there. So I was wondering if you can help us understand more about what is homeopathy.
Sure, I can take that. And I did not actually practice this one, so yeah, open to negotiation on it. So homeopathy is a holistic system of healthcare. And a holistic system of healthcare means that it is something that works on the mental, the physiological, the emotional, the spiritual, the psychic, because the mind and body actually are one. And its tenet is that we, as people or sentient beings, at one point knew how to heal ourselves. And in this day of age, having to adapt to eating food that maybe has poison in it or breathing air that isn't good for us, we have lost that ability. And so homeopathy is a system of healthcare that helps teach the body or reteach the body how to heal itself. And if I can just go on with what that means for one more minute. So in conventional medicine, you go into a doctor, you have, let's say, a migraine headache, the doctor gives you a medication, your migraines go away. But everyone who has migraines gets the same medication, so it isn't specific for you. And if you go off medication, your migraines come back. So it's really symptom management. It's not healing what's going on. In homeopathy, we ask more questions about the migraine than you have ever been asked. We find out what makes it particular to you, because everyone's migraine is different. And then we give a remedy that is specific to the person, that helps the person start walking towards the direction of health. So over time, they don't need to keep taking the remedy because their body has just given up the need for migraines. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I will confess to our listeners that Kathleen is my homeopath who I've been working with for a few years now. And I have a book on homeopathy about helps you figure out what remedy you might want to take in terms of just basic home stuff. And maybe just to help our listeners understand a little bit more, one of the things that I find really interesting in the book that they ask about in terms of figuring out what exactly is going on is not just about symptomology, but also about what people's cravings are, and not just their food cravings, but are they craving cold air or warm air? Do they want to be touched and want to be around other people, or do they want to be alone? Do they want to be, do they feel more energy in the morning or at night, and that kind of thing. So it really helps specify what's going on for the person.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit more to what she so beautifully explained about the nature of homeopathy and about the holistic nature is that, for example, someone who does have migraine headaches, the remedy that can help them is also based on not just their migraine symptoms, but all the ways that their body and mind, your whole person, tend to go out of balance. We each have a way of going out of balance when we get tired, when we get stressed, when we get overwrought. And so we're really looking at the constellation of ways that person tends to go out of balance and matching one remedy for the person, including, for example, the migraine headaches, but maybe also including digestive issues, including anxiety, including insomnia. Nick, to your point about temperature, cravings and such, those sort of things might be just more characteristic. They're not necessarily going to change about a person with a remedy, but they do help us to match the person with the remedy. So yeah, in that way, we really are always trying to look at that biggest picture possible. Now, sometimes, as you mentioned, Nick, there's can be some self-care things at home, like a self-limiting condition such as a cold, or sometimes an earache for a child or something like that you really are looking at a smaller set of symptoms and just matching the remedy to those very specific symptoms. And that's totally appropriate, and homeopathy can work that way. And that is the way that it's often labeled and marketed in this country as over-the-counter usage. But the way that it was developed over 200 years ago was really more based on this holistic way of finding one remedy for a person.
Yeah, and I'll just give my own story of experience with homeopathy. So when I've struggled with allergies off and on in my life, and probably my mid-20s, they started getting bad again, and I was trying all different kinds of things, and I'll try homeopathy because I, see it at Whole Foods or whatever, and look at their little chart and look at my symptom and that kind of thing. And it never really worked very well. And I was just kind of like, I don't know if this really works. Does this thing really work? But then I met Kathleen a few years ago, and I came to one of your workshops where you were talking about cold and flu season, I think. And you had a worksheet and you explained it more about like it's more specific than just the general symptom. And I was at work one day and I started getting a little bit of a sore throat or a stuffy nose, I can't remember. And I looked at the worksheet and I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. So on my break, I went and I got it and I came back to my office and I took it. And within an hour, I felt like way better. And I hadn't taken anything else that was going to affect it. And that's when I really knew like, oh, okay, so there is some validity to this thing. It's not just about like that it doesn't work. You just have to find the right thing. And sometimes it takes a few tries to find the right thing. So you've explained a lot about how it works, but for people out there who are still like, but what exactly is it? Like, can you just tell us, like, what is it that they were actually putting in their body? And one of the ways you've described it, Kathleen, that I really like is nature's original nanomedicine. So what is this nanomedicine and what makes it?
Sure. Yes. Let me take that at least to start. No, it's a great question because it is often unknown or confused with herbal medicine or all things natural. As Sandi mentioned, it is its own system of natural medicine based on these principles that we talked about earlier and some other principles actually. But basically the remedies are made from natural substances, but they can be made from literally anything on the planet. So there are thousands of them, thousands of homeopathic remedies. And they can be made from animal, vegetable, mineral, and many kind of more other things. And one of the other principles that it's based on is called the like cures like principle. So the founder of homeopathy was a medical doctor, but he was noticing that the medicines of the day a couple hundred years ago were actually causing more harm than good. We're poisoning people essentially with heavy metals. And so he started experimenting with diluting down substances to see how much could you give and still get a therapeutic effect without harming the person. What a concept. And then also kind of stumbled upon this cures like principle when he noticed that the substance cinchona bark, what is known to us as the remedy called China, that people used it to treat malaria. But if you actually take it too much, you can get symptoms like malaria. And so he started seeing if that was a more universal principle and found that to be true. So as he was experimenting with these very, very diluted down remedies now, saw that you could give a very fraction really of material dose to a person to essentially nudge the body towards health for the same things, the same set of symptoms that can be created by that substance if you take too much of it. And that is the like cures like principle. It gets also kind of confused. People will say homeopathy, oh, isn't that the hair of the dog medicine? And that's the cures like principle, but it doesn't mean that you need to take the actual thing that quote unquote made you sick. It's a similarity principle. So we're looking at the symptoms and matching, again, the nature of the person and the quality for something that's like that substance. It may not be that substance. And, I was just going to say, so the most controversial thing about homeopathy, as you mentioned, Nick, nature's original nanomedicine. So people will say there's no way that it can possibly do anything because the remedies are so diluted. And that is true that for the most part in the remedies that we're using, the substances, the original material is so highly diluted, there theoretically can't be one molecule left. So it's beyond Avogadro's number. So how can it possibly do anything, right? And that's where people would say, well, it's energy medicine. It's the energy of that material. Because I was an engineer before I was a homeopath, I will often say, we don't yet understand fully the mechanism by which it works. We know that if we create the remedies, definitely in the way they were created 200 years ago with the same materials and the same procedures, that they work in a specific way. Some of the best research in this area is coming from India, where hundreds of thousands of people rely only on homeopathic medicine. And they are looking at the remedies with scanning electron microscopy for, through physics departments. And they are finding nanoparticles and silica nanostructures of the original starting substances in the remedies. And the cool thing that I think, and again, we don't fully understand the how and the why, but we see that the higher dilute, we know that the more dilute the remedy is, the stronger it seems to have these homeopathic principle effects. And so that is another paradox about homeopathic medicine. But they have also found that the higher the dilution, the smaller the nanoparticles approaching the level of quantum dot size. So now you start to get into quantum physics effects, which to us, I mean, we use the very, very high potencies in homeopathy for more spiritual and, such things as epigenetic trauma effects. So it makes a lot of sense to us to find some of these things. Do we still fully understand how it works? I would say no, but I do think that there's some exciting research happening there.
So you just mentioned working on more of the spiritual level, and I know that it also works on the emotional level. And I imagine that because I'm not a homeopath, when I try to describe it to people, I start with the like, cure, like, and I use the example of allergies. But can you help us maybe share a little bit more about how that works on the emotional and spiritual level?
Well, can I just jump in with something about the like cures like? So just an example of that is if someone comes into my office or comes into a homeopath's office and they have symptoms of digestive disorders, ulcers, they're kind of this, aggro, like drinking 8 cups of coffee a day kind of person, road rage. Often a good remedy for that kind of person is a remedy that's made from coffee called coffea. So it, often if someone drinks 8 cups of coffee a day, they could start exhibiting those kinds of symptoms. So that's the kind of thing that like cures like means. A good remedy for people who have poison oak might be a remedy that is made from poison oak, but not necessarily. So it's what's happening with the dilution is that we are diluting and then we're banging. And there is something in that that is breaking open the quote unquote language of the substance and almost having that language speak to us on this molecular level. And so I just wanted to add that to the conversation because I think that that is really scientific and romantic and really beautiful. And getting back to your other question now was how homeopathy can work on, did you say emotions or spiritual? Or?
Yeah, both. Like, how does it work on both those levels?
Yeah. So, because it is a holistic system of healthcare, we are treating all of the symptoms someone has. So I personally am a trauma-informed care practitioner. And so I see quite a few people who come in who we might start with physical symptoms. And at some point during the appointment, we will get into anxiety, depression, past trauma. And so, we start out in one place and we wind up in a whole other area where somebody is, I don't want to say it's the crux of the struggle, but it could be. I mean, that's putting a judgment on it that I don't know enough about to say, but it does feel like we're going back to the beginning in some way. And that if we take that apart, make someone feel safe, have them kind of, certainly not re-traumatize them, but kind of go into what the fear is maybe, how that maybe ties into the physical symptoms that they're having now. And like Kathleen said, really kind of give some thought to what kind of potencies we're giving, things that are more dilute, which means a higher potency. We start seeing change very quickly on physical level, emotional level. Often one of the first things that I notice is people who have chronic sleep issues because of trauma, or, maybe or maybe not because of trauma, but are correlated with trauma, immediately start sleeping better. And that, for me, is really a sign of we are walking in the right direction. And for a lot of people I see, it means that they're ready to start either working on their trauma, maybe in some sort of somatic way, putting down their trauma, letting go of some things. Like there are some very deep shifts that I see on that emotional level and spiritual level with giving a good remedy.
Yeah, I would add also, just to reiterate, the remedies, so they are proven in a certain way, noticing, again, like if you take too much of a substance, what can happen, what kind of symptoms you can get. But the way that we find out more about what a given remedy, a substance can help someone with is with a homeopathic proving. So that involves taking it in remedy form and maybe multiple doses, where if you're taking, this is another kind of interesting, slightly spooky thing about homeopathy, where if you take a remedy more times and you really don't need it, you're a healthy person, whatever that means. So you get enough provers, you will see themes coming out in terms of you can develop symptoms, temporary symptoms related to what that remedy can help with if you repeatedly take the remedy when you don't need it. So that is part of how we prove and find out what a given substance can be helpful for. And so those things can include mental, emotional, deep states of anxiety, depression. Sometimes it's even, again, everyone's different, but it could be something along the lines of, I never felt like I even arrived on this planet. Those kind of feelings. It's not even a depression. It's like, I don't feel like I belong here. Again, certain remedies, just sort of looking at the mental, emotional sphere of things can be very effective for things like with conventional we don't diagnose, but with symptoms of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So some of the ways that the mental, emotional, and spiritual realm can be expressed in those more kind of limiting ways, there are remedies that are very helpful for those. But any remedy can be indicated for trauma, for depression. But we do have some very, groups or types of classes of substances that have more of an affinity for a history of trauma. And it's not always clear why that would be. Sometimes it's a little counterintuitive, and sometimes people draw connections between substances and potential trauma, such as our remedies made from the gems seem to pretty much all have an affinity for people who have a history of trauma. I think one of the folks who's proven a lot of those, Peter Tuminello, believes that relates to our human relationship to those gems, and often the trauma that humans undergo in recovering those things in the world, such as diamonds and other precious stones. So it's interesting, we see these associations sometimes, and it's not always clear why that is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So speaking of trauma and other emotional challenges, those are some of the bigger challenges that the queer community in general struggles with. And I'm wondering if you have any stories that either of you want to share about ways you've used homeopathy specifically with the queer communities.
So one of the things that I really love about homeopathy and learning homeopathy is that very first day that you're sitting in your number one class, the first tenet of homeopathy that you learn is to not judge, or is to learn what to do with your judgments, because it's impossible to not judge, but how to look at our own judgments of something or someone and set it aside, how to learn what is pathology and what is not pathology. And so just the practice of homeopathy teaches the homeopath not to judge or pathologize somebody if that is not part of their struggle, if that thing is not part of their struggle. And so I know that a lot of queers go to medical offices, even in this day and age, and feel somewhat pathologized or feel invisible or in some way not represented. And one of the beautiful things about homeopathy is that there is built into training as a practitioner the holding of people's stories. And so I know that there are people who won't go to healthcare practitioners who feel much safer in a structure like this. I think both Kathleen and I have practices that have a lot of people in it who are on the margins of society, whether that means gay, lesbian, queer, trans, questioning, bi, if it means part of the kink and leather community, the non-binary community, so places where people don't really see themselves reflected anywhere else, I think feel safe in an office like a homeopath's office. I didn't know if you were looking for specific stories or...
No, either is fine. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Kathleen?
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally, it's interesting. It makes me think back to when I first decided to see a homeopath when I was trying to figure out if I wanted to study it. And so I went to see my son's homeopath. And the first thing that jumped into my mind was like, is my being a lesbian going to be part of what's wrong with me in this system of medicine. Like, I really didn't know, and I didn't know. I mean, it sounds weird, like I could have asked her that, but I didn't feel comfortable asking her that. But so it is not looked at as...
Homeopathy will not be used to make you straight or assist.
Conversion. Homeopathic conversion.
We put those remedies away.
No, but I think it's a question that comes up often, in people's minds for whoever they're going to be reaching out for, and it's not obvious. So yeah, that is not something that we consider, obviously, to be, not only because of who we are, but the system of homeopathic medicine does not consider queerness to be an imbalance, just to be clear about that. But so, yeah, I would say, I mean, it sounds like a really obvious answer, but it's hard to describe the level of integration that can come from having a good constitutional homeopathic remedy. It may not happen right away, but often over some time. And I should mention too, the way we look for people to get better is sort of from the inside out and from the top down. So that means when there is mental, emotional, imbalance, which most of us have to some extent or another, we're looking at how limiting is that to a person. And with a good remedy, we want to see that start to get better sooner than later. So if there is anxiety, if there's negative thoughts, does that mean they're going to disappear and never come back again? No. It means with a good remedy, they should be less severe, less frequent, and just having a bit of space from those things that plague all of us, really. So it really, again, is not people, who have familiarity with conventional medications might be expecting like a natural antidepressant or a natural anti-anxiety that sort of kicks in and similarly may have some disconnection from feeling. It's often not like that. It may be something that brings forth and helps them to feel more fully and then fully move through or integrate into a healthier state past some of those feelings. So it's very different. And so I think for, my clients in the queer community, often there is just a disconnection that happened somewhere along the line, often due to societal, sometimes parental or familiar influences that weren't so positive, not always. But the question we're always asking is like finding out, do you still feel stuck anywhere along the line from that? And that can be more important than what happened specifically as an individual, how someone copes, and whether they feel or recognize that they may still be held back. And what is that? In what ways are they? So that's what we look for the remedy to help shift in a person. And that can be incredibly freeing for queer people.
And we do continue to still get marginalized, and the queer community does have a higher proportion of injury, violence, trauma. And as Kathleen just kind of tipped on before, there are people who come in who just feel like they haven't quite fully landed. And I think that there are a number of people in the queer community, in the queer community or not, one of the ways that I assess if a remedy is working is watching how somebody starts inhabiting their own space in their body. And if they are moving towards their higher calling. And so just by that alone, if somebody's higher calling is to be the best queer they can be, that is the remedy helping them do that and walking towards that purpose of what they're doing here. And I don't know that there are a lot of places in the world where marginalized people can really kind of create that intention to do that with a healthcare system.
The other thing that I'll say that comes up for me in my own personal experience, not only with homeopathy, but with other non-Western medicine practitioners that I've worked with, it's built into those modalities that you really sit and listen and investigate very deeply what's going on with the person. And I think for queer people and other marginalized people, like just that alone of being listened to so deeply in that way, just that in and of itself feels healing and validating. Because I've been to, I have the privilege of having insurance and seeing a Western medical doctor for something that I think that might only be helpful for. And because of the way that most of them work and their practices are set up and their relationship with insurance, they're very they get you in, they ask you what's going on, and you feel very rushed, and it's just okay, see you, bye, and you're in and out in 15 minutes. Whereas most other non-Western practitioners I've worked with, it's at least an hour that they're sitting with you and working with you and doing whatever the treatment is and that kind of thing. And I think that just that aspect alone is really healing for other marginalized people.
Yeah, it's that way of giving space so that symptoms can talk and really tell you why they're here and what they're doing and what purpose they're serving, so that we can say goodbye to them. I mean, you need to have space for that. You need to have space so that if someone comes in and says, I have irritable bowel syndrome, you have a moment in time to say, and what else? Because their allergies, their irritable bowel, if they're in for one thing, there's often not time to say, are all these things related? How can we walk the entire system towards health? You can't do that in a 15-minute appointment.
Yeah, I always kind of laugh when I have an appointment with Kathleen. She always says, and is there anything else? And she keeps going until I say no, which is good. It's good. So on a little bit of a different subject, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I think it's really important to talk about is that from what I've seen and heard, what's happening in the homeopathy world is that it's under scrutiny, at least here in the United States with the FDA. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that for our listeners so they can understand a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yes, I agree. It is very important. And like so many other things in the year 2020, it's hard to know when reading things online what's actually happening and what is hyperbole and all of that. So I would say that in a broad brushstroke kind of way, part of what's happening is that homeopathy has gained in popularity at a very quick rate in the past, especially 15 years here in the US and really globally, much more so globally, actually. We're a little bit behind the curve here in the US, but I believe it's estimated to be around a $3 billion over-the-counter market right now in the US. And so part of at least what the FDA is telling us, one of the reasons why they're scrutinizing more heavily at the moment and reconsidering potentially how they deal with homeopathic medicines is because of that growth, is because in the past they have recognized homeopathy for over 100 years here in the US, and there's an official Homeopathic Pharmacopoeia of the US, which in that are the official homeopathic remedies, and that for the most part has been decided by the homeopathic community. There's a panel of folks who determine the ways that remedies get proven and how they get accepted into the HPUS. So the FDA has primarily just looked over the manufacturing process. And again, we would specify the dilution level and how the remedies should be made, but they have some oversight into what are the good manufacturing procedures for us and for any substance that people consume, which is a good thing. And we are very supportive in our relationship with the FDA in inspecting and enforcing good manufacturing principles. As I think we touched on, because of this like cures like principle, a lot of homeopathic medicines, the starting substance is something that can be toxic to people. So you would never take, and the kind of well-known incidents that came into the press in the last few years was some teething tablets that are made from belladonna. Belladonna, of course, is a plant, but you wouldn't go out and consume that plant in its natural state. So when it gets highly diluted, it can be very helpful with all kinds of inflammation and fever states, including the kind of inflammation and pain that's coming up with teething. That is another thing that the FDA cited, that particular case and a few others where potentially the remedies were not being manufactured properly, and potentially there could have been, one molecule of that original substance in the remedies, which could be a problem for people. To my knowledge, just on that one, on the record, they tested those teething tablets and they did not contain harmful amounts, anywhere close to harmful amounts of the substance. But it was the fact that the manufacturing process wasn't within control. So they flagged it, and from what they're telling us, that they had a difficult time getting the company to respond in a timely way about that product. So they are now considering, from what they've told us with this new draft guidance that just came out in October, which is similar to a draft guidance the FDA issued a couple of years prior to that, they're wanting to consider potentially all homeopathic medicines as new drugs. And our interpretation is that meaning in the homeopathic community, is that they would each require a new drug application, which is millions of dollars, and basically trials the same way you would try a conventional pharmaceutical drug, which is not how they work. So it's a problem. Again, we're trying to work with the FDA, and some groups more than others have been highly engaged. There is a coalition of homeopathic organizations trying to be on the same page about all of this. And I'm a member of that group as the president of the California Homeopathic Medical Society. So I can say that it's been kind of a good thing for our community to get together and get on the same page. A real emergent leader has been a new consumer-based group called Americans for Homeopathy Choice. And I would highly recommend for people who are interested in helping us to preserve access to homeopathic medicines here in the US to go to their website. And I can follow up with you, Nick, with a link for that. But I believe it is just americansforhomeopathychoice.org. And they have a landing page that is specific where you can submit comments. Now, the comment period will be ending, from what we know, on March 23rd. On the FDA website about this latest draft guidance. But Americans for Homeopathy Choice has had a really great effort to help people make helpful comments to the FDA and local legislators. There's some chance we might get the comment period extended beyond March 23rd, and we think that would be really helpful if it did. So by the time this airs, please check with Americans for Homeopathy Choice website, and maybe sign up also for their newsletter, or check them out on social media, because they will have probably more calls to action about what is going to be happening with this. And I think there will be a lot more press coverage of it in the coming year, depending on what happens. But the homeopathic community has awakened on this one, and especially the consumers. There are a whole lot of moms and parents, but a lot of folks who use these remedies at home, even if they never come to see a homeopath. And they rely, once you've felt it work for an acute even, it's like, oh, I'm not going to get sick now. It's kind of a whole new world. Like, it's not that you never get sick again, but it's an incredibly powerful, tool to have in your tool belt, and families really rely on them. So there are many thousands, tens of thousands, if not more, hundreds of thousands of moms in this country who are at the forefront of engaging with the FDA on this.
If I can just add to that, it's hard to figure out how to do clinical trials on something like homeopathy, because as we've been talking about, it's an entire paradigm shift from the way that medication works in this society. And having said that, there have been many very good studies done on the effects of homeopathy. And they're all over the NCI website. A lot of them are on my website. I believe, Kathleen, you have on your website. So studies and trials have been done. Kathleen is taking the high road here and not saying anything disparaging about big pharma and drug companies. But I will dip my toe into that, in that if there is something that is a direct threat to the world of medication in this country, that needs to be suppressed, because we have the potential in homeopathic remedies to really counter that. Kathleen and I can both tell you story after story after story about clients we have seen who have kicked off all their medication because they found some good remedies. That is something that we always advocate that people do with their doctors. We don't do that. We understand that part. But as people walk towards health, they lower their doses, they get off medications, and that is a huge threat to big pharma in this country. So just wanted to kind of put that out there, that there is possibly a little bit of a witch hunt around homeopaths. And the irony is that there are many medications out there for whom the side effects include death, and everything leading up to that, and they are approved by the FDA. The side effect of a homeopathic remedy is that you might get a temporary aggravation, or you might feel nothing at all. Those are the side effects.
Yeah, I will add to that. I mean, so I have a free homeopathic clinic for seniors in my neighborhood, and a lot of my seniors have reduced or eliminated some of their pain medications for arthritis, for example. And some of them are in much more fragile states of health, and many of them are on many medications despite everything. But I'm just thinking of a couple particular folks who are on the more sensitive side and who really cannot tolerate most conventional medications. And when they found out about this potential threat to homeopathic medicine access, after everything they have been through with their health and other challenges in life, it was devastating. And so there are people like that who are very sensitive, who feel like this is the only form of medicine that I can have, and it helps me so much. And if I lose access to it, it's my whole quality of life goes out the window. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing more about that important topic. So as we start to wind down, I wonder if each of you can share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish.
Well, for me, that's easy. I have an incredible community of queers who hold me, challenge me, remain loving and compassionate and all of that. And I have a queer yoga group that I've been doing yoga and spirituality and retreats with for many, many years, OJAH, OJAH, which is pretty incredible. They're in the Bay Area, and they have scholarships for women of color. They have a really queer forward slant on yoga and meditation, which I just find incredible. I'm going to give them a shout out.
Awesome. Yeah, for me, this is going to sound like a bit of a broken record, but I have to really give credit to my homeopath, Lynn Ferrugia, because I think for me, I've been lucky that I've been in relatively good physical health. But for me, homeopathy has been the one thing that has helped to sort of open me up spiritually and allow me to be more fully who I am. So I feel like that includes being a lesbian. It includes acceptance. It includes a lot of other things. I don't think I would be not only as healthy, again, physically, but I would feel as open and connected to the queer community and just to myself without homeopathy. And I think she's a particularly talented homeopath. So I thank her.
All right. So I know that I think each of you had an event coming up that you wanted to share about. Sandi, you had an event coming up.
I have an event coming up at the Delta Mind Body Center, which is here in Sacramento. Sometime in April or May, the time is still to be determined. And I did want to give them a shout out because they are a center here that does integrative medicine, therapy, yoga classes, Pilates, and they are a center made up primarily of queer or practitioners that identify as part of the LGBTQI community. So I think they are a beautiful resource, and that is coming up. And when a time is determined, that will be on my website.
Okay. And Kathleen, you wanted to mention a conference?
Yeah, the California Homeopathic Medical Society has an annual conference somewhere in California. This year, it will again be here in the Bay Area, in Marin, in Corte Madera, the first weekend in June. So that is June 5th through 7th. And it is appropriate for healthcare professionals who are interested in homeopathy. It's usually more helpful if you have at least a little bit of a background in homeopathy, if not a professional homeopath. But I mention it because there may be people listening to your program who are in that camp. Also, I think, there's a Friday night session only if you wanted to kind of understand more a little bit about without coming to the full weekend and hear more about constitutional homeopathic prescribing.
It's also a really wonderful community that shows up for that, and the talks are always pretty mind-blowing. It's a great time.
Thanks, Sandy.
And Sandi, what is your website?
Divine Monkey Homeopathy, it's a long word, .com. And if you can't figure that out, you can just Google Sandi Kaplan.
Okay. And Kathleen, your website?
My website is bernalhomeopathy.com. Bernal is Bernal, like Bernal Heights in San Francisco.
All right. Well, I will have links to your websites, and I will try to get links to most of the other things that you mentioned on the show notes so people can also find them there. But thank you both for being here today and sharing with us the mysteries of nanomedicine in homeopathy and how that can be supportive to us on many levels.
Thank you so much, Nick.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Nick.
I work with many queer folks who struggle to get their needs met or who suffer from having their boundaries violated by others. Because you may not have been cared for the best, you might have a hard time identifying your needs. Or because you have been violated or bullied, you might not completely understand where exactly your boundaries are. If you'd like some help exploring your needs and building more resilient boundaries, head over to my website and download the free guide, Needs, Boundaries, and Self-Care Support for Queer Folks. This is a short introduction to help you start to shift and change your relationship to yourself and others, and to feel more safe and resourced day to day. So just head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/needs to download your free guide today. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.